What's up, my viewers? Don't forget to leave feedbacks. Enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The question of why she betrayed him echoes in the young man's mind as he watches his beloved in the arms of another man who casually mentions that it took him some time to break into his house. Because the world had already ended, there was no longer a civilized society and power ruled everything. The girl says that strength dictated the rules and that he should understand and not bring shame. So the man grabs his baton and prepares to strike, while the young man asks what he intends to do with him. 28 weeks after the world turned to ice, humanity lay buried beneath layers of snow. A man steps onto the frozen surface, leaving footprints, and an elderly man, nearly frozen, watches him as the boy passes by with a backpack. He removes his mask and inhales the cold air, saying that it seemed no one had explored this area yet, as comforts like food and fuel had become scarce and precious. The young man looks down from a cliff, noticing that the ice layers were deeper and assuming it should be safe there. However, the ground suddenly begins to tremble. He turns, saying this was bad, wondering if it was an earthquake. The frozen world was God's way of saying that human civilizations were as fragile as layers of ice. Then, the young man plunges headfirst into an icy abyss, realizing that if he falls, he will lose his life. He grabs his equipment and tells himself not to give up now. Securing himself against the ice wall, barely managing to stay on his feet, he thinks he isn't slowing down fast enough. Eventually, he crashes onto an old store. Lying on the ground, he smiles, saying that he landed in snow and would have died if it had been solid. After all, as the saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Looking ahead, he appears anxious, because the scariest thing in this frozen world was a three-eyed creature, which some call the White Skins, monsters that see humans as prey. The young man is about to finish his sentence, but is startled by white armor. He immediately flees, thinking that he is still far from being safe. A parasite crawls along the ice stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Just as the white armor is about to seize the young man, the ice stalactites are severed. They shoot toward the demonic creature, piercing its head before it can harm the boy. He wonders if it was just a collapse caused by the commotion, but quickly changes the subject. Either way, he was safe. Snow begins falling again above him. The boy shouts that more were coming. However, the snow only falls beside him. He is buried under the snow and sighs in relief, thankful to be safe. Yet he is now trapped as the parasite slithers toward him, creeping closer to his arm, which is stuck in the snow, and then merging with him, making the boy wake up suddenly, but with one of his eyes now a different shade. Kneeling in the snow, he asks what just happened. However, a blue vein had spread along his neck. Either way, he had been outside for quite a while now. Then he notices a chocolate bar and says he can't return empty-handed. He needs to hurry. Amidst a massive frozen structure, he reflects that with most streets buried beneath layers of ice, he should return using tunnels, but he isn't sure how much longer he can continue living this way, since it wasn't any better than living inside the buildings, where many people had been trapped when the disaster struck, and with resources running low, no one knows what could happen next. After all, not everyone could avoid crossing the line. He approaches a corridor and looks around cautiously, noticing that no one is patrolling there. He should get home quickly. Knocking on the door of apartment 409, a girl with two buns in her hair opens the door. The young man asks why Ming opened the door like that, but the girl quickly embraces him, saying she really wanted to see him. She asks if he missed her, and he nods, saying he did. But he also wants to know if she locked the door, to which the girl dramatically asks if locking a door is more important than his girlfriend. The boy pulls out a chocolate bar, saying he found it for her, handing it over. She is surprised and asks what it is. Soon realizing that it's a chocolate bar, she hugs her boyfriend tightly, screaming that she loves him so much. Pulling back, the girl asks if that's all, and the young man explains that he nearly got eaten by a monster to get it, so she should hurry up and eat. However, the boy's backpack is stained with blue blood. Growing suspicious of her partner, the girl breaks the chocolate bar. Sitting before a fire, he says he hasn't found anything decent in the past few days, wondering if he should eat all the seeds he managed to gather, because he had planted them all, but none had grown. However, if he ate them now, he might be sabotaging his future. So he sits on the chair anxiously, saying he would go crazy at this rate. The boy picks up a piece of meat and says that if eating this was safe, then the people here wouldn't need to tolerate their enemies anymore. He throws the meat into the fire, turning it blue as he remarks that it was highly flammable and a good fuel source. Seeing a broken clock, he wonders if it was Valentine's Day. Scratching his head, he reflects on whether he had forgotten about it, but he walks toward his girlfriend, apologizing for forgetting, only to fail in finding her. Outside the door, the boy hears a strange sound. That was the signal he had planned with Ming Ming, and he wonders what she was doing outside. So he quickly opens the door, only for a bat to come flying toward him, hitting his face with full force. The boy is sent flying in an instant. Then, the intruder steps into his home and wishes him a Merry Christmas, asking what he thought of the surprise while holding Ming in his arms. The boy asks if Chen Ming really betrayed him with Lu Dalong, but the girl yells that he still wanted to know the reason when he had deceived her first with one of his chocolate bars, because he had been stockpiling food and had a large backpack for it. Lu Dalong slams his bat against the ground and apologizes to his little friend Mo, saying that he should at least give him a small warning, since the world was over and now everything was ruled by strength. The weak couldn't even protect a woman. He had two choices: trust the strong or become food, and now Mo should hand over whatever food he had. The boy asks how it would be possible to hide anything from him, but Lu Dalong doesn't believe him and declares that this would be the end for him, striking his leg with the bat, then hitting the boy's face, knocking out one of his teeth, even breaking his arm. It was a horror scene as they beat him until he lost his life. Completely injured, one of DeLong's subordinates searches the entire house but finds almost nothing. DeLong says they should be more thorough, demanding a knife. Then he cuts Mo while he still lies there. Lifeless, Mo reflects that what he feared most had happened. If he had another chance, he would make them pay because he wanted to live. And so, an entity grants his wish. Mo wakes up in an office, his computer still on. His eyes suddenly open, screaming Lu Dalong's name and wondering what just happened, because he had just lost his life, but now he had no injuries at all. There were only 28 hours left before the world froze over. With violent protests erupting in the streets, the police department had deployed a massive force to contain them. At the same time, the elites of Manhattan were drinking with their companions, and the gangs were making deals in the deepest parts of Brooklyn, because no one in that city knew what was about to happen, except for him, who had gone back in time. People admired the northern lights in the sky, but the boy already knew that they were a prelude. Then he looks at his phone, thinking that the only person who would call him at this hour was his girlfriend Ming Ming. He remembers her calling him weak, so he reflects that he had never noticed her true nature, someone who betrayed him in such a way. Thus he decides that he will cut her out of his life. He answers his girlfriend's call. She asks if he is working hard right now because the aurora looks beautiful, and she asks her boyfriend to send her some money, since her credit card was frozen. Mo, however, tells her that they are breaking up and that she should stop calling him from now on, leaving the girl in shock. But he simply deletes her contact from his phone. As he walks, he reflects that now that he has a second chance, the girl who made him lose his life should just freeze along with everyone else. On the Brooklyn neighborhood bridge, the time was 11:58 p.m. as the boy says that for this opportunity, he needs to prepare properly. In his past life, within the next 24 hours when the world froze, the temperature would drop to 0, and he had 28 hours. In theory, it seemed like a lot of time, but what people would do would only bring chaos and collapse, so realistically, he needed to gather as many resources as possible within an hour. Besides daily necessities, he needed equipment for self-defense amid this chaos, so he planned to look for something like a pistol. Police officers saw the boy walking and said he looked suspicious wandering around at this hour, so they should work together to apprehend him. One of them stepped out of the car and called out to Mo, ordering him not to move. Pointing his gun at him, he commanded Mo to place his hands where he could see them. His partner spoke into the radio, reporting that they had a suspect on 4th Avenue, while the officer asked what he had in his hand. Meanwhile, the young man analyzed the officer's confusion. He said he was just holding his phone, but the countdown hit 0, and he reflected that he didn't have time to waste on a pig like the officer, so he prayed that they would let him go after an inspection. The officer warned him that at an hour like this, he shouldn't approach without caution. Meanwhile, his partner asked what was in the backpack and told him to hand it over. Mo explained that it was just things from his office job, pulling a blue notebook from his bag. In a panic, the officer screamed that it was a weapon, and fired a shot at Mo. The bullet raced toward the boy without mercy. The young man thought this was it. His chance to live was about to end here, but then he denied that thought, telling himself he would survive. His eye began to glow with electric blue streaks. An aura surged around Mo as the bullet approached. The young man wondered what was happening, because he could see the bullet's trajectory, questioning whether time had slowed down for him. So he tilted his head to the side, realizing he could dodge it, and it wasn't an illusion. He cursed the officer, saying he was a citizen and the cop had no right to shoot him. Then he rushed toward the officer, saying he couldn't waste time on fools. The bullet missed and struck the ground. Instantly, thin layers of ice formed over it. Mo moved so fast toward the officer that he left trails behind him, landing a punch to his face, shattering his jaw and making him spit blood. The officer collapsed onto the ground next to his overweight partner. The second officer trembled as he looked behind him, seeing his friend completely wrecked from the impact. Wanting to know what the hell had just happened and what had done that to him, the officer fell to the ground in terror, pointing his gun at Mo. He demanded to know what the hell he was, but the young man calmly approached the man, saying that even he didn't know what he was, and then a single scream echoed through the Brooklyn streets. After the incident, the overweight officer reported over the radio that an officer was down and a suspect had fled with their firearm. He repeated his call, urging the station to respond. As a trail of blue energy formed ahead of him, he muttered that his day was cursed. Leaving a glowing trace behind him, Mo sprinted away, heading toward his home in apartment 409, and collapsing onto the floor as the energy dissipated behind him. The young man took deep breaths, shaken, wondering if what had just happened was real, wanting to know how he had managed to do all of that. Then he picked up the gun, determined to test whether he could do it again. He aimed the pistol at the mirror and fired a shot. His ice power activated, turning one of his eyes cyan. Mo suddenly moved forward, catching the bullet in his hand. He grinned excitedly as he realized what he had just done, wondering if he had awakened some kind of superpower. Looking at his shoulder, which was covered in ice, he questioned why, since the global freeze hadn't even started yet. Could it be because he moved with the bullet? Like a supersonic jet, perhaps? He concluded that this ability affected his speed. It might not seem too sophisticated on paper, but with his knowledge of the apocalypse, he was already one step ahead of everyone. A knock came at the door, making him turn to see who was looking for him. It was an elderly woman named Mrs. Fang. She questioned little Mo about what that gunshot was. The young man made up an excuse, saying it was just his TV, that he had broken the remote and apologized for the noise. But the woman sighed, reminding him not to forget what had happened at the nearby supermarket. The streets weren't safe, so he should be careful. Mo thanked her and apologized for worrying her, but she simply returned to her apartment, saying that young people shouldn't overwork themselves, and then she closed the door to Mo's apartment. The young man quickly shifted his focus back, returning to the main problem of resources. Remembering the supermarket that the old lady mentioned, he realized it might have everything he needed for the apocalypse. So, with a wicked smile, he decided he would stockpile his food. At the supermarket, the cashier yawned quickly while a security camera recorded the shelves. It captured only Mo looking at the food, but in the blink of an eye, he vanished into a blur. The girl didn't even notice, continuing to yawn in exhaustion. But then, an enormous receipt appeared on her screen. She wondered what it was, and if someone had made a purchase. Reading a note at the bottom, she saw a message telling her not to be scared and to go home to stay safe. That made the girl question the strange receipt. First they were robbed, and now they were receiving odd messages upon checkout. However, at the same time, two men entered the store. One of them had a pistol in his hand. The girl sighed, wondering what was going on these days. But then, the man pointed the gun at her head and apologized, because this was a robbery and she needed to hand over all the money in the register. He told her to hurry up while an icy aura crept toward the store. The gun began to freeze from the cold. Then, the entire store followed, coated in frost. A leg stepped inside as one of the robbers asked why it suddenly got so cold. His partner ordered him to turn toward the door, so he did, and came face to face with a tall, slender white armor. The thief demanded to know what the hell that thing was, what kind of monster it was. His partner immediately fired at the creature, but the bullets simply curved around its bluish blood. The thief screamed that they couldn't kill something like this, firing again as the creature's hand reached for him. The monster grabbed the thief while commenting on his face, slowly peeling off his skin with its fingers. Then it ripped off the man's face, saying he tasted bad. The cashier held up her phone, determined to record this. A video captured the monster devouring the thief. Police officers watched the girl's livestream on their phones, commenting that this format was popular. But then, an error message appeared on the screen, making them wonder if it was a government emergency alert. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the city, warning all citizens. Mo opened his door, hearing that this was a broadcast from the Department of Logistics and Security for the Homeless. He was surprised it was starting already. The city was experiencing an unexplained cold wave, and everyone was instructed to shut their doors and windows. The cold wave was coming, and Brooklyn would be the first to suffer. An hour and 9 minutes had already passed since the beginning. Inside Building 58 of the new district, in an ordinary apartment, the alert urged citizens to pay attention. It repeated that this was a message from the Department of Logistics. Meanwhile, Officer Joe commented that it must be serious if they were getting involved. A girl smoked a cigarette while watching the alarm on her phone, and Mo used a screwdriver, thinking that there wouldn't be any setbacks. Lou DeLong flicked his lighter and asked if the man wasn't going to talk. Beaten and bloodied, the man weakly said he truly didn't know anything. So DeLong pulled out his phone, asking if he still didn't recognize it, demanding to know what was in that photo because he had drugged the boss's daughter. The man sobbed, insisting he didn't know at the time. But DeLong crouched down, telling him that he should start praying, so at least God might have mercy on him. Then he stretched out the man's hand and drove a knife through it. He mentioned something about counting from 1 to 5 inside his box. Inside the box were 6 severed fingers. One of the henchmen asked Alon what they should do with this guy, but the young man said that the sin of lust deserved death by fire, so they should throw him into the boiler. The subordinates hurled his body inside. Then they sealed it shut. One of them muttered that the boiler was old and might explode, but the other told him to shut up. Luo was waiting for them. However, the henchman near the boiler suddenly noticed something was wrong. A massive explosion erupted from the apartment. His friend grabbed onto his arms while his partner cursed, covering himself in the growing shadow. The screwdriver slowed to a stop. Mo declared that the plant cultivation structure was finally complete. With his current supplies, even if he didn't leave, he could survive for quite a while, but it still wasn't enough, because supplies would eventually run out, and sustainable self-sufficiency was the key. His plan was to build the perfect survival chamber, one that could sustain itself indefinitely. He picked up his phone, noting that the freezing phenomenon had been going on for almost an hour now, and he needed to hurry, because this was the time to speed things up, since in this world, time was life. But then, a knock came at his door, and the young man wondered what it could be. As he opened it, he questioned why the sensation felt so familiar. Officer Joe apologized to Mr. Mo for disturbing him. Mo then asked old Joe what the problem was, wondering what was going on. Joe explained that the temperature had suddenly dropped, and the heating system was broken, so he was warning everyone to stay safe. Mo remembered something happening last week. The malfunction wasn't fixed in time, and when he had gone to repair it, it was already completely broken. He couldn't repeat the same mistake, he had to fix it, so he asked the officers to let him take a look. Then he closed the apartment door behind him. Climbing the stairs, the officers asked where he was going, and Mo asked if the boiler room wasn't supposed to be here. Joe explained that the boiler was in the basement. They needed to go downstairs. Mo reflected on how the boiler room was illegal in the apartment complex. Fang had mentioned it before, so it should be upstairs. He wondered if he was developing early amnesia. Inside the basement, Joe commented on how cold it was. Then Mo noticed something strange about the smoke. It felt like cold air. Joe led him toward the boiler. Mo tinkered with it, saying it should be fine now. But then he noticed a blue liquid on his hand and wondered what it was. Joe's partner asked if there was a problem, and at that moment, 2 white skins appeared behind him, exploding his head while screaming for fingers, saying that they were growing back. Mo questioned how this could be a white armor, while Joe panicked, asking what the hell that thing was. Overcome with terror, he was paralyzed. The white armor prepared to attack. Mo activated his ability immediately, dashing in front of Joe and pushing him down to prevent the white armor from striking him. Then he sprinted away, muttering that old Joe had almost lost his head. He noticed that the door was still open, so he bolted toward it. If he ran at full speed, he could escape. But the white armor caught up, right behind them with its mouth wide open. Mo wondered how it could keep up with his speed. Then, the monster nearly struck him. Mo questioned if this was happening because he was carrying old Joe, so he picked him up in his arms, apologizing mentally, because he would have to throw him toward the door. Then he hurled old Joe with all his strength. Joe went flying, shouting, "What the hell is going on?" Crashing outside, knocked unconscious. Mo turned back toward the white armor, but the monster attacked with its head. The young man panted as he dodged the blow. That white armor kept repeating the word finger. Mo wondered if his power was connected to old Joe, trying to understand why this was happening and how his ability worked. He recalled holding old Joe and realizing that without him, his speed increased, but his ability was limited. The monster turned to attack again. Lin Mo blocked the strike, saying that his condition had nothing to do with the white armor, because it was clear that when he threw old Joe, something strange happened due to his energy activation. He wondered if there was some kind of connection between them. Noticing the pebbles on the ground, Mo finally understood his condition. In his past life, humans faced the white armors with no chance of survival, so all he could think about was running. But now things were different. Now he was the hunter, and no longer the prey. Mo grabbed a stone from the ground. This time, he wasn't running. He readied an attack, gripping the pebble in his hand, taking a baseball stance, charging his energy into the throw. Then he hurled it toward the creature. Mo's assumption was correct, just as he thought, because his ability could only affect targets contaminated by his energy. With kinetic acceleration, the energy amplified, and even a tiny stone, when sped up to a certain degree, carried the power of an electromagnetic railgun. Blood splattered onto the ground. It was dripping from Mo's eye. He questioned what was happening, noticing that his blood was blue, and wanting to know what the hell was going on. Mo collapsed onto the ground, vomiting blood, falling unconscious, unable to move. His last thought was about how cold he felt. But before his vision completely darkened, old Joe approached, holding the young man, calling him Lin, and telling him to open his eyes. Inside Joe's house, his wife commented that the wind was too strong. At this rate, they couldn't take him to a hospital. Meanwhile, the boys struggled to get the main door open. Joe ordered them to block the wind and turn on the heating. His wife worriedly remarked that the boy looked poisoned. As they shouted for him not to fall asleep, the officer found Mrs. Fang and started talking about Lin Mo, but the woman cut him off, telling him to stop talking and go find Xiao Zhu. Xiao Zhu approached, asking Joe to excuse him. She told Joe to leave Lin Mo there, and Joe commented that the boy would be fine. The doctor continued, saying the officer should check the stairs because it was a mess, and despite his body temperature being so low, he was still alive. She wondered if he was some kind of cryogenic person. The doctor began recording a report, stating that the male patient was suspected of poisoning and was still in a coma. His vital systems were abnormal, and his body temperature was around 10 degrees Celsius, but his pulse and nerve reflexes were in normal condition. She turned off the phone, saying it was unbelievable. The blood separation process was complete, and she needed to check the result. She realized it was something she had never seen before, because before centrifuging, the blood looked no different from normal blood, but afterward, blue impurities were separated. Since the analysis would take time, she needed to continue observing the patient's surface characteristics. Even on his body, if not looked at closely, the markings could be mistaken for veins, but upon closer inspection, they resembled an allergic reaction. Suddenly, Lin Mo opened his eyes. The doctor asked if he had finally woken up, while the young man tried to understand what was happening to him. The woman continued, telling him not to walk around like a headless chicken, while Lin Mo wanted to know who she was. Xiao Zhou lit a cigarette, saying she was an unlicensed doctor and for some reasons couldn't reveal her real name, but he could call her Dr. Zhu. She then asked how he ended up in that state, because to be honest, she had never seen these symptoms before and wanted to know what had happened in the basement. She was very interested in him. In Brooklyn, the temperature had dropped to minus 29 degrees Celsius. The world record for the lowest human body temperature was 13.7 degrees Celsius. While the human body could tolerate 0 degrees Celsius, prolonged exposure froze tissue and destroyed cells. Temperatures below 32 degrees Celsius caused hypothermia, and humans couldn't survive in minus 29 degrees Celsius or with a body temperature lower than 13.7 degrees Celsius. After explaining this, the doctor removed the thermometer from Mo's mouth, telling him to take a look. His current body temperature was 11.5 degrees Celsius. It was a miracle he was still alive. Lin Mo could only wonder how this was possible, trying to figure out if it was because of his ability. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. He needed to complete his plan quickly. Dr. Zhou smirked, saying she understood. Lin Mo then slipped on the water on the floor, falling and hitting his head as Zhu turned around, annoyed, telling him that she had ordered him not to move since his body was weak. But that wasn't the real issue. She had discovered what was wrong with him. She asked if he had a superpower, shocking the boy, who wondered how she knew. However, he didn't have time to waste on her. He scoffed, asking what kind of joke this was. But Zhou explained that she had been observing him as a doctor. The young man thought that as long as his ability was active, even if he had to climb everything again, it would be faster. But then blue blood dripped onto the floor. The doctor asked if he was okay as he coughed up blood. He realized he couldn't accelerate now, and based on his past experiences, he knew what was about to happen. Meanwhile, DeLong walked toward a door, saying that after meeting with Dr. Zhu, they needed to behave a little better. His subordinates understood. Then he stopped in front of apartment 509. Inside were Zhu and Lin Mo. The young man was startled, wondering what was about to happen, but Zhu gritted her teeth and told him to get up. He needed to move, asking for Lin's hand. Lin sat up on the stretcher, asking what the problem was, but the doctor ordered him to lie back down. There was no more room for questions. The young man needed to understand why all of this was happening so suddenly. Zhou told him that if he wanted to survive, he had to do exactly what she said, telling him to wait and not move under any circumstances. Then she pressed the button to open the door. Lu Delong stepped inside, apologizing for the intrusion. He was greeted by Dr. Zhu, who asked what he wanted. The man asked if he could come in for a quick chat, and the woman told him to do as he pleased. Inside the house, Zhu asked what he needed. The gangster explained that he had heard the resident of apartment 409 was receiving treatment and had something to discuss with him. Zhao replied that the person he was looking for had died from poisoning. DeLong simply sighed, saying that was unfortunate. Lin Mo recognized Lu Delong's voice and wondered why he had appeared here, if in his previous life he had been completely frozen before showing up. If he could use his acceleration ability now, he could take DeLong's life himself. The gangster notices something strange and turns around, saying that Dr. Zhao had been working hard all this time, but he had seen the patient blink, so he wanted to be sure that he was lifeless and asked what she thought about him helping to check. Zhou says that she had already told him the truth. Then DeLong presses the ignition of her lighter, saying that the doctor had saved so many of his brothers on the street, and there was no way to repay her, because it was his fault and the woman shouldn't be upset. But she shouldn't forget who was taking care of the clinic and her, so she should give a quick answer about something. Then he leaves the apartment, telling her to think about it, and Ju complains that it was nonsense, but she tells Lin Mo to get up because DeLong had already left, and she thought he had many questions to ask. Lin Mo asks why DeLong wanted to take his life this time since there was no reason like in the past life, and also why Joe was protecting him. But before anything else, he asks the doctor where his clothes were, and she wonders if that would really be his first question. Brooklyn reaches minus 40 degrees Celsius. One of DeLong's henchmen comments that when he was young, he watched his father take care of the furnace and felt that he couldn't be a loser like him, but now he admires him. His friend replies that it was just the messed up weather outside, and he didn't need to lament over his father. DeLong asks if he thought everything would improve in a few days, and the subordinate apologizes. But the man adds that government messages used to be broadcast every 20 minutes, and now even the internet has stopped, as if they had given up. So this sudden cold wave must be God's punishment for humanity. Joe, who is tied up, asks why God doesn't punish a sinner like him then. DeLong approaches and says he was just managing the apartment and wanted to know if the order he created wasn't harmonious. But the officer complains that he ordered everyone to leave and get supplies for him, or else he would cut off the heating. The gangster asks if it wasn't fair since it was an equivalent exchange. Joe simply calls him a parasite. DeLong turns around, saying it was a shame Lin wasn't among them. Otherwise, he could be benefiting from someone else, leaving Joe in shock because of that. Joe asks if Lin was already dressed and tells him to come to her when he's done, but the young man was struggling even to get dressed. He asks what she needed, and the doctor wanted to know if he had any idea how long he had been unconscious. The young man guesses 6 hours, but she replies that it had been 6 whole days, completely surprising him as she explains everything that happened during those days. Since DeLong controlled the heating system, forcing residents to trade supplies for it, many people were forced to go outside, which was the same as losing their lives willingly since those who went out thought they were going to heaven anyway. Lin Mo curses him, saying that no matter where he was still a beast. Then he asks if there was any way to recover his body. Joe smiles while the cigarette is still in her mouth, saying yes, and if he wanted her to tell him, there had to be a condition, since she runs an underground clinic and she doesn't do charity, and she asks if he would accept. Lin Mo asks what the condition was because he would agree as long as he could do it. Then she holds his chin and says he has to be her research subject and allow only her to study him, reassuring him that her research wouldn't bring him any harm, since, as she had said, she was very interested in him. Lin Mo, with a smile, responds that the deal is done. Then the woman explains that there was a special substance in his blood, but she hadn't yet discovered what it was. What was certain was that it absorbed thermal radiation and converted thermal energy into usable energy for the entire body, but absorbing too much made his body cold. Simply put, his body suddenly had a way to store energy, so he was just hungry. Lin Mo asks if eating would be enough to recover. The doctor agrees, but the amount he needed to eat would be huge, and she didn't have that much food. The man tells her not to worry because he would figure it out. Then he heads towards his apartment through the emergency stairs. Thinking that it was good, he had prepared in advance and planned to go to the supermarket to buy some supplies, moving stealthily against DeLong's henchmen because as long as he got home safely, it would be a victory. Opening the door of apartment 409 and pressing the button on his key, he notices that everything inside was frozen. Lin Mo wonders if they cut off the heating in his room because that could freeze someone to death. But because of DeLong, his room had turned into an igloo, so he opens a box, saying it contained the highest calorie food. Inside were stacks of chocolate bars. He remembers Ming Ming and says he needs to change this brand the next time he buys chocolate. Then he bites into the bar with all his strength. However, there was no reaction, and it seemed like that amount wasn't enough, so he needed to increase the dose. So he does, eating chocolate non-stop and feeling the sensation, because it was as if something inside his body was creating heat, and it was a bad feeling like he was about to lose control. The henchman opened the apartment door, asking why it was unlocked, since the boss was planning to cut off the man's fingers to force it open, but today it just opened on its own, and there were tons of supplies inside. Lin Mo smirks while eating the last chocolate. The henchmen ready their weapons and ask who he was and how he opened the door. Joe in her lab reflects that the final simulation report was ready, and she should see exactly what was inside his body, noticing that the reversal process affected neural activity. Therefore, that was bad. If too much glycogen was replenished, he would become different. One of the henchmen yells that it didn't matter who he was because everything there belonged to them. But Lin Mo's previously bluish energy turns red as he enters a state of madness. 72 hours earlier, Joe went to the boiler room and asked what the hell had happened there to turn room 409 into this, noticing something strange forming on the floor and wanting to know what it was, but she collects it as a sample, saying it was interesting. However, a camera was pointed at the place. She says it looks like she'll have to go to the security room to find out the truth. From a recorder, a man starts an announcement, telling all residents to pay attention, because they should distribute supplies rationally to avoid waste. DeLong's henchman grabbed Joe by the arms, saying he was too heavy, but his friend reminds him not to forget what the boss said and to keep an eye on the boiler. DeLong continues, saying that all residents must pay a small compensation in exchange for heating, and a drunk man asks if this was some kind of joke from Joe, but his colleague replies that it didn't seem like the old man. Then the gangster explains so that everyone understands the seriousness of the situation, walking over to the heating switch, saying he would turn it off for a while to save some resources. With his lunatic expression, he shuts it down. Lin Mo suddenly wakes up, facing a man who asks if he hates. The boy was dressed like a prisoner and asks what he was supposed to hate. Then the figure asks if he hated DeLong, repeating the name Lu DeLong. Lin Mo replies that it was obvious he hated him, grabbing one of the henchmen by the neck while emanating his energy. The henchman is surrounded by a red aura. Then Lin Mo's eye turns the same color. He thinks that the henchman was Lu DeLong, saying that human flesh and beef tasted similar. Then he hurls the man far away, sending him out of the building and making him crash to the ground while burning in red energy. The people outside are shocked, seeing the completely charred body in front of the building, saying that he looked like he had fallen from the 4th floor. His friend asks what the hell just happened and who Lin Mo was, wondering if he was an alien as he approached him. He notices the energy and questions if it was a red aurora, quickly realizing there was no way to win against Lin Mo, and rushing at the man, planning to do whatever he could. But the hooded figure smiles, seeing the image of Lu DeLong in the henchman. He uses his speed to appear behind him, shocking the boy with his incredible speed. Lin Mo calls him to come at him, trying to provoke him, and so the henchman swings at him, but the man was no longer there. Trying to strike again, Lin Mo appears behind him, thinking of Lu DeLong, telling him not to move. Then the hooded figure prepares his hand, stretching it back as the henchman runs toward him, and then activating his power with his eye, dashing forward and slicing the man's body in half. Someone suddenly opens the door. Ming calls out to Lin Mo, shocking the boy with her presence. He looks at Ming, who was pointing a gun at him. Then shooting a dart toward his stomach, he asks why. Zhao says it was just insulin, making Lin Mo's aura dissipate, and as he falls into her arms, the doctor explains that it was to break down the excess heat in his body. But she looks ahead, astonished, because all the plants had bloomed. She wanted to know what had happened there. Hunger is a catalyst for human atrocities, from eating each other to wars, which are things that repeatedly occur throughout human history. But as agricultural technology developed, human society gradually stabilized. However, hunger never left them, for in a frozen world, cultivation is an almost impossible task. History was about to repeat itself, but there is always an exception. So Lin Mo sleeps with his head resting on the plants. Zhou comments that he hadn't been awake for long and would have to sleep a little more, apologizing. But she wanted to know what all of this was. Picking up a tomato with her hands, she takes a bite of the tomato shortly after. The doctor tries to analyze the taste, saying that it wasn't bad at all, and the quantity was enough to feed the entire building. 2 people walk through the snow. The stomach of a girl growls, and she feels embarrassed by the sound. Her partner asks how she's feeling and if she can hold on, but the girl simply says that it shouldn't be a problem. Then her friend touches his coat and says he just remembered a chocolate bar. She tries to be polite and refuses, but the man says that the bar was almost taken by DeLong, and he thought it was in this coat. His wife tells him to stop looking and asks if he doesn't remember, because they gave the chocolate bar to their daughter that morning. The husband turns to her, stunned. Then he laughs, saying he completely forgot, depreciating himself, saying he was useless, while a claw appears beside his head, destroying the man's face with a single strike. His wife stands in despair at what just happened. After all, they were facing a massive white armored creature that held her husband in its hand, then devouring the rest of the man's body. His blood splatters onto his wife's face, and the white armored creature says she looks delicious. The woman looks up and asks what that thing was, but someone blonde yells at her not to stand still, so she turns toward the voice and runs to escape the monster. The blonde shouts for the girl to come to him, and to run if she wants to live. The woman runs away from the white armored creature, but the monster tries to grab her with its hands, and the girl only glances back. tripping in the snow and tumbling away. She falls hard onto the ground and tries to get up while the monster chases after her, crying as she pleads for her life. The blonde grabs a bottle of alcohol with a rag and ignites it with a lighter, throwing it toward the creature, which gets hit, triggering an explosion. Sparks of fire land on the woman, while the creature is engulfed in flames, screaming that it hates the heat, giving the wife a chance to escape. Facing the building, she thinks the monster might not have followed her. Seeing an elevator, maybe she could be saved, but the monster was still behind her, completely shocking the woman who desperately wanted to live. She cries again and repeatedly presses the elevator button, and the white armored creature keeps calling out to her. The girl screams at the damn elevator to hurry up, but the blonde appears, ordering her to close her eyes, completely surprising the woman who wasn't expecting it. Lights begin to flash, blinding the creature, which screams that it hates the brightness, and the blonde raises his hand, holding a pick between his fingers, getting ready to play a rock song. Then he strums his guitar to save the woman. Sound waves burst forward, and the creature screams that it hates rock as it rides in agony. The woman's name was Dorothy Perez, and her childhood dream was to become a doctor. After growing up, she finally became one, a nurse, but she was unhappy with everything around her. But then she met Matt, who ate his food shyly beside her, and she too seemed excited to be by his side. After that, they got married. Then their daughter was born. Finally, they even moved to a new apartment. But it was something she knew very well. Whether the world suddenly froze over or criminals invaded the apartment, she feared what would come next after going through so much, wanting to understand what was happening now because that man with just a guitar managed to suppress that monster. And that was definitely the most ridiculous thing of all. The man finishes his song, raising his hand high into the air. Then the creature tries to grab him, saying that noise was irritating. But panting from his little performance, the man simply steps on a button on the floor, releasing metal rods from the ceiling, which shoot toward the creature, piercing it and catching it off guard, trapping the white armored monster among the wreckage. The monster's hand trembles in its final moments. Dorothy, astonished, asks if it's over, collapsing to the ground as she cries, saying that it was finally finished. But she looks ahead cautiously, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The blonde extends his hand toward the girl, telling her that everything was fine now. Dorothy sits in front of a campfire, lost in thought. She looks at a picture of her family while her husband's face is covered in blood, and the man hands her a cloth, telling her to let her husband rest in peace, sitting beside her as he continues speaking. Because from dust to dust, from ashes to ashes, they needed to protect the living beyond mourning the ones who lost their lives. Dorothy looks at him with a strange expression. Then the man lights his cigarette and tells her not to worry, creating an awkward atmosphere between them. Dorothy introduces herself while the blonde stammers a bit, saying that she could call him Corbin. The woman thanks him while looking to the side, and Corbin accepts her gratitude. Dorothy asks if he was also going out to look for supplies. However, Corbin says that his situation was a little complicated, opening his guitar case and asking for a second to show her something, since he came from Seattle searching for a friend. But as soon as he arrived, he got trapped by the cold wave. Then he hands her a photo, saying that his friend was the one wearing the hat, and they used to play together in a band during high school. Dorothy immediately recognizes Lin Mo in the photo and says he was the guy who lived in apartment 409. Then a loud noise shakes both of them, and Corbin asks what was happening, because the entire city was trembling from the event. He asks what those things were, as a white armored monster stomps on the ground, while another has its neck slashed open, and a third has elongated arms. A whole army of pale-skinned creatures advancing. Dorothy notices the direction they were heading, since it was toward the apartment building. Lin Mo finally wakes up, wondering how he passed out, and in front of him is a woman's body. Startled, he tries to understand what is going on. Zhao finishes doing something behind him, and asks if he was awake already because she had put something on him, making Lin Mo question what was placed on him. But the young man was restrained in a chair, and the doctor tells him she installed a safety measure on him, revealing a collar around his neck. Collars are one of the oldest ornamental pieces, and their meaning has always changed. In the past, they were a symbol of slavery, representing control and ownership, but now they can also be a toy for adults. Zhao says Lin Mo shouldn't worry because the collar on his neck was definitely not for those purposes, so he asks about it, thinking that he wouldn't have thought that way if she hadn't said anything, telling her that he agreed to be her research subject, but not for this. The doctor says that the collar was a special monitoring tool, and that Lin Mo was a research subject, asking if he remembers the things inside his body, because they help him absorb heat and store it. However, it seemed to have another function, and this collar was made to prove that hypothesis, since when his blood sugar levels are high, it will activate another state, and the collar will change from blue to red. Lin Mo asks what she was talking about and what this other state was. Then the doctor questions if he remembers what happened 20 minutes ago, The young man is surprised by the question, noticing that he can't recall what had happened. Joe tells him not to worry while placing her finger on his face, saying it's fine if he doesn't remember since she was there to figure out what was happening, because all of this was part of her research. Lin Mo thinks that he always felt like this woman had some control over him, but he really wanted to know what was going on, since once he found out, he would definitely gain some advantage over her. Joe presses a button on her keyboard, injecting something into Lin Mo's bloodstream, which makes the young man glance to the side and see an IV drip, questioning what it was. He notices that it is glucose with a 25% concentration. The doctor turns, noticing the reaction it caused, and says that first she will record the data. While Lin Mo just wanted to know what was happening, Joe smiles and says she almost forgot. She kneels in front of Lin Mo, and the young man asks what she was planning. Then the woman places a plant between his legs, completely surprising the man with the unexpected action. He quickly looks at the plant. His gaze starts to turn red along with the marks on his body. Then a red energy fills the room. He shouts that the doctor dared to deceive him, but his other self appears, saying that it was interesting. Stepping out from behind Joe and walking toward Lin Mo, he approaches the small branch of the plant, making it grow and then bear tomatoes. Then he asks if Lin Mo could see him now. The young man asks what was going on, and his other self says it was nice to meet again. Lin Mo questions if he was his other self, trying to tell the doctor that he was hallucinating, but his other self explains that the doctor couldn't hear him now. Lin tests it for himself, realizing there was no reaction when he spoke, so he asks if this was the work of that entity. The other self explains that, in a way, it was, but not entirely. Lin Mo grows irritated and asks what he meant by not entirely, and who he was, besides the fact that they looked the same. The being explains that they were both together, to be exact. After all, alone, he couldn't have reached this level. He pulls down his hood, saying that regarding his identity, that should reveal who he was. Lin Mo is shocked when he sees. After all, his other self's eyes were bluish, and he asks if Lin remembers. The young man says that he was the parasite from back in the cave, and the parasite confirms it, showing the mark on Lin Mo's back. He explains that his powers and the ability to resurrect were thanks to him. Transforming into a woman, she tells them both to get along. The National Security and Logistics Bureau was a branch of the agency, also known as ASLN, and was one of the few departments that could operate independently. The logistics agency had its own medical unit, administrative units with capable people, and even military units. This agency was considered the last safeguard of civilization in the world after the government collapse, and someone calls out to Xiao Luo, asking if the network had not yet been restored, while the woman had a photo of herself and Ju on her desk. Xiao Luo says that Miss Barbara had asked the same question 28 times in the last 2 days. Then Barbara sighs, looking at her partner. Xiao Luo begins to explain about the information department and a hardware issue, but Barbara shouts that she already understood. She has the surname Ripley and is a level 4 leader in biochemistry, saying that, to be honest, they were just passing responsibility around. Barbara asks if the report was complete, and Xiao Luo says it was almost ready. The woman says that was good enough and that it should be sent to her first, and her subordinate questions about the rest. With disdain in her voice, Barbara says that the bald guy wouldn't read it seriously anyway. Because the situation was urgent now, she opens a government document. She thinks that it was all starting again, and her bald boss complains that this was not the time to discuss such things. Frank Kordick, a level 2 minister, shouts that first, there were climate changes, then cyber attacks, rendering communication useless, and even the frontline operators had been out of contact for 48 hours, not to mention that their agents had not been properly activated. Therefore, they were in trouble and needed to act. He says that war never changes, and his soldiers, but he is interrupted by a kick from Barbara straight to his lower parts, saying that he shouldn't be worrying about political matters right now. In the sample observation room, she asks if he understands her urgency. Frank stares ahead, stunned, and Barbara explains that the white armored creature was found near the bunkers. The monster merely repeats that it was just a husk. Xiao Luo says that the creature was a mutated human. Frank questions this, but Barbara tells him to look at the monster's neck. The bald man starts to focus, noticing a collar on the creature, which he identifies as a member of the Field Operations Department. He wants to know what was going on there, and Barbara explains that it happened before the network went down. A signal from a missing agent was detected near the bunker, but when the department found his body, he was already lifeless, and his codename was Silver Hammer. She explains that 24 hours later, the body underwent a mutation and became what they were watching now. Xiao Luo adds that they had obtained some information from the CIA, and this creature was being monitored even before the Cold Wave and other related events. That footage was from the same supermarket, and those two were the first monsters, temporarily referred to as husks. an image of Lin Mo appears on the screen, and she says they had been calling him Number 0. The young man wonders what was going on there, because just a second ago, the parasite was an insect, but now it had turned into a woman, whom he actually finds quite beautiful. The parasite smiles while looking at Lin Mo, saying that humans get shy when they see the opposite sex naked, then sitting on the young man's lap, making him wonder if it was an illusion, because the surroundings seemed as if time had frozen. The parasite says he could think of it that way. Lin Mo is startled, asking if she could hear what he was thinking. Then the parasite explains that yes, she could, because they were now fused, and Lin Mo complains that the explanation was weird. The woman says he could only see her because of Zhao's sugar, and Lin Mo realizes it was an illusion, then asks if the parasite had been activated. She twirls her hair in her hand and says that, strictly speaking, that was his blood, and that was the part that granted Lin Mo his abilities. The young man asks why she was parasitizing his body, and the woman says he was a curious creature, because she was different from humans and didn't belong to this dimension, making Lin Mo repeat that statement in disbelief. The parasite continues, saying that they needed to parasitize the bodies of natives to gain the ability to understand this dimension. The young man complains that it sounded like something out of a cheap romance novel. The parasite says her race has no name or definition, traveling between dimensions without perceiving time but unable to interfere, needing hosts to break barriers. However, she admits it must be hard for humans to understand, saying that they wanted to hear their own names and see the castles built over time, yet they couldn't interfere with the world, questioning how they could prove their own existence. Lin Mo asks if this was existentialist philosophy, because from what she was saying, she sounded quite lonely. The parasite is suddenly surprised, then bursts into laughter, asking if he was feeling sorry for her, and if this was what humans called empathy. Then choosing humans as hosts seemed to have been the right answer. She embraces him, saying that his current expression was cute, but she had some bad news. Since the moment they fused, Lin Mo had become a target for the husks. The white armored creatures advanced toward the apartment, taking the form of wolves that gathered together. Their leader comments that the scent there was of food, but he also smells an enemy, ordering his group to move toward the building. The creatures crash into the structure. Lin Mo asks what the parasite meant by husks, and she responds that he would find out soon. However, if he needed anything, he could seek her out since he now knew how. Then the parasite claps her hands, and time resumes its normal flow. Meanwhile, a vial falls close to the ground. A severed head lands beside it. A girl runs away from a white armored creature, in a corridor filled with lifeless people due to the sudden attack. The building's residents run, rushing down the stairs, but a man is cornered by two monsters, banging on the door and shouting that it had locked itself at the worst possible moment. The white armored creatures finally reach him, piercing his body as they break through the door. Liu Delong's subordinates had been taking care of Officer Zhou, but they prepare to fight as the creatures invade, asking what the hell those things were. Zhou only watches as the two men are impaled by the monsters, wondering what those things were. Since they looked like the creature from before, he notices some red points on the monsters, questioning if they were sucking blood. However, the monsters hadn't noticed him yet, and he needed to find a way to escape. It would be difficult to break the rope without tools, and the pillar had no sharp edges, so he decides to resort to an old trick from his youth, gripping his thumb with the other hand, and pushing it downward to dislocate it, freeing his hand from the rope with ease. Zhou says it was good to have those old injuries from his youth. Now his fingers tend to dislocate easily. He tries to move stealthily since the monsters don't seem to have noticed him. However, he realizes that in this situation, he couldn't leave empty-handed. Zhou thinks he needs to find the security vault, and luckily, the thieves hadn't realized it was a weapons cabinet. But then, a white armored creature appears in front of them. Zhou curses the whole situation out loud. Meanwhile, Zhou comments that, just as she suspected, the plants respond to his influence, capable of growing rapidly, and Lin Mo asks if she could undo everything. The doctor says that although he can do it, the boy cannot use the ability for long periods, or he would end up weakened. She has collected most of the data she needed, and Lin Mo yells at her to hurry up and help him undo it. A tremor shakes the room, and Zhou questions what that sound was. The door of the room begins to rattle. Frightened, the doctor asks what is happening. Lin Mo is surprised and asks if it could be a monster. One suddenly appears in the room. He notices that it is a white armor. The parasite whispers in his ear that it is the shell. Lin Mo turns around, asking why she is still there. But the creature puts a finger on his mouth, saying that this was not the time to be thinking about that, because if he doesn't act fast, Zhao will lose his life. Lin Mo activates his ability and rushes forward, questioning why all the women around him are so difficult. He picks Shu up in his arms while apologizing and asking for her permission. Then he flees far away using his powers, The creature attacks the wall since Gio is no longer in front of it. Lin Mo lands on the ground, still holding the girl, and asks if she is okay. However, he notices the girl's embarrassed expression. She touches his chest and says it was fun to experience his ability like that. Lin Mo helps her up while they both face the monster. Jo questions what it is, and her friend responds that he doesn't know, but it is definitely dangerous, calling for Dr. Ju while stepping in front, because he wants to deal with that creature. Ja reminds him that he shouldn't overuse his abilities, and the boy agrees, saying that he wants to tell her something, since, although she is a bit clumsy, judging by the results, she really helped a lot, and he thanks Dr. Ju. She is completely surprised by this, and questions why he is bringing this up now. Lin Mo prepares for battle and says they can deal with those small matters later, because he will make sure to properly thank her. Several white-skinned creatures appear in a room to face him. The boy is taken aback by this, wondering if it could be a collective action. Dealing with one was easy, but with so many, he might fall into a weakened state again. Jo asks what's wrong since she was eager to see how he would thank her, and Lin replies that maybe she should wait a little longer. Then the monsters charge at him. Realizing he will have to face the white armored creatures head-on, he prepares a combat stance against them. Jo picks up the tablet and says that since this is the case, she should test his limits, monitoring his glycogen at 100%. Lin dodges a creature, thinking that if he keeps using acceleration continuously, he will end up weakened before finishing them. But he grabs one of the monsters, saying he has a way, because he only needs to use the power when necessary, throwing the creature towards its group. The creatures regroup to attack, and Lin thinks they are not as dumb as they seem, but he is no longer the monster's prey. Lin Mo activates acceleration in his eye, noticing that when the ability is activated, time slows down for him, allowing him to observe the beast's movements and predict their attack. Thus, he dodges the strikes, realizing that with this, he doesn't even need full-body acceleration, and the same applies to his attacks, advancing against the creatures again. Even unarmed, as long as he accelerates his fists to a certain degree, he can trigger a supersonic explosion, destroying everything in the room. Lin Mo turns to the remaining beasts and asks if they are afraid now, since he is just getting started. Jo, analyzing the data, comments that although calorie consumption hasn't decreased, the efficiency of ability usage has been optimized, since in all this time he has consumed less than 10% of his energy. She finds this interesting with a smile on her face, calling Lin Mo a test subject, and telling him that he could unleash himself with that previous move. Lin complains that, as he suspected, she was monitoring his body condition. The beasts charge at the boy, who prepares his strike, shouting that the doctor is a fraud while unleashing a blast of power. Lin Mo takes a deep breath after the attack. The veins in his neck have already turned blue, and his arm is still consumed by energy, but his glucose consumption is still at 83%. The doctor approaches, saying he has mastered his abilities very well, and the boy just turns to look at the woman. She continues, saying she has a question, since he seems to know a lot about these things, ordering her test subject to tell her everything he knows while exhaling smoke from her cigarette. In the boiler room, the body of the white armored creature stretches out in blood. Jo was unconscious beneath the monster, but suddenly he opens his eyes. Looking around, he asks what is happening and notices the blood on the floor. He pulls the knife from the monster's belly. While trying to understand what just happened, he moves the monster aside. He remembers the fight he had against the creature, and that if he hadn't had the lever, he would have been finished. But he walks out of the room, thinking about what would happen if the monsters appear again, and he wasn't as lucky. A vibration comes from the phone in his pocket, making the man question whether the network was still down. But the call was from an unknown number. Jo puts the phone in his pocket, and the caller greets him with a "Good morning, Josh Castillo," asking if he should call him Mr. Curved Blade. Lin Mo explains everything he knows to Ju, while thinking that he wouldn't mention having lost his life once and traveled through time. The doctor changes her outfit and comments that she expected as much, but if he was done talking, he should help her with the zipper. The young man zips it up while she explains that it was a prototype environmental protection suit from her previous job, and Lin questions the sudden outfit change. Jo tells him to look at the ceiling. Since the white-skinned creatures had invaded the vents, they might have damaged the ventilation, and asks if Lin hadn't noticed the temperature drop. A noise is heard outside. Both go to the door. Finding Dorothy's daughter, Jo comments that it's just a child, and Lin says she's his neighbor. The little girl runs, and the young man chases after her while the doctor says she hates kids. Lin is surprised when he looks down the hallway, because the path is covered in blood and a little girl is pointing. Zoe notices several corpses on the floor and says they are residents of the building. While Lin wonders why all of them have gunshot wounds, he approaches the child, telling her it's dangerous around here. But the girl points to old Joe, who is lying on the ground. Lin thinks that he had already lost his life, and in his previous life, it had been Joe who took the initiative to share food, but he also lost to a white armored creature. So he touches the body's shoulder, saying that in the end, good people never get a happy ending. Suddenly, Joe grabs Lin's hand, which startles him, making him scream dramatically. The old man explains that he hadn't passed on yet but still owed Lin one. The little girl grabs Joe's hand, asking if she is a doctor, because her mother said that doctors wear clothes with red crosses, and she had one on the back of her hand, asking if she could help Uncle Joe. Joe looks at the child without reacting, but then she steps closer, saying she will make an exception and won't charge anything. She kneels beside Joe and asks what happened to leave him in this state, but Joe says it's a long story, since after leaving the boiler room, his plan was to get to the security room, but the first floor was full of monsters. He ended up climbing the emergency stairs and found several survivors along the way, and since the monsters were coming, his only option was to keep going up. But that's when something happened. Lu DeLong appeared with a firearm, shooting survivors in the head as they climbed the stairs, leaving the bodies for the white armored creatures to devour. Joe asked what the man was doing, but DeLong commented that he was simply using the weak to buy himself time, shooting at the other survivors along the way. While aiming at the girl, he said that the strong had always been above the weak because it was a rule established by God, firing his weapon again, hitting Joe, who stepped in front of the shot. After that, DeLong kept going up, while Joe lay there bleeding until he lost consciousness. Zhao says that fortunately, the bullet didn't hit a vital point, but he lost a lot of blood and needed to get to a safe place. Lin Mo repeats the name Lu DeLong with rage, stepping forward as Joe asks what he plans to do. The young man looks back while activating his abilities. DeLong shoots at other people along the way who scream for him to wait, saying they are human, but the man contradicts them, saying they are just weak meat, and that having bodies everywhere was good since it was enough to slow the monsters down. Because although that place was an old warehouse, it should be the safest spot in the building. He opens a door, hoping to find supplies inside, but he notices a dark presence coming from the hallway. Lin Mo pulls down his hood, saying that he is facing the man once again, calling out to Lu DeLong with anger. The gangster fires at the young man, asking if he wasn't supposed to be in hell, but Lin dodges all the shots while charging toward DeLong, landing a kick that severs his leg, then lunging forward with his hand shaped like a claw, slicing off the arm holding the gun, and grabbing DeLong's head with his hand. The man asks why he is doing this while Lin heads toward the balcony. Since he hadn't even done anything to him yet, Lin Mo questions how he could say he hadn't done anything, but then he realizes that nothing from his previous life has happened yet. But after coming back, he never sought revenge, as he only wanted to create a safe place for himself. However, looking at the situation now, that had been foolish as innocent people lost their lives. And all of this made him furious, but it was clear that his anger wasn't just toward DeLong, because he also felt anger toward himself for being such an idiot, burning DeLong's body with his power, and hurling it toward the white-skinned creatures while declaring that now, if he were to do it again, he would do the same to his enemy 100 times over, because that was the law of the frozen world. Joe and the little girl warmed themselves by a fire. Zhao comments that the building manager used this place as a storage room, so it could be useful to them since there were still some supplies left. Lin Mo sits in the corner near a crate, thinking that he finally got his revenge, but it didn't feel like it was enough. The doctor interrupts him by smacking his head, asking what he is thinking, since she already suspected he had issues with that bastard, and it was normal for people to become compulsive when they had great power, but in Lin's case, it was different, thanking him for getting rid of DeLong. Lin asks if she also had problems with the gangster, and the woman recalls moments from her past with him pointing a gun at people. The young man stands up and says the doctor doesn't have to answer if she doesn't want to, since they would be staying there for now, and because it was used as storage, the heater didn't work, and seeing how the place was, everything still seemed intact. But old Joe was injured, and Maggie was just a child, so they wouldn't be able to rely on the fire in the barrel forever. With dangerous white-skinned creatures outside, they needed to reinforce the room's security, and they could use the available materials for that. However, if they wanted real warmth, they needed to go to the power room. Joe comments that the building is full of monsters and fears what could happen if they don't do something about it. Maggie suddenly sneezes while they are talking. Lin says she could end up with hypothermia if she stays still like that, and Joe explains that there is only one way. Inside a garbage tunnel, footsteps are heard. Mo suddenly falls out, landing face first on the ground, grumbling about it being the garbage tunnel of all places. But he is surprised when he looks ahead. Seeing a creature that looks like a core, he wonders if the white-skinned beings have fused with the residents, forming a nest. He turns around, noticing a strange noise, wondering if it could be a white armored creature, but Joe suddenly falls on top of him. On the ground, Lin comments that the doctor is stopping him from getting up. The doctor retorts that she can move if he takes his hand off her. A sudden noise is heard, and she signals for Lin to stay silent. Then the creature looks to the side, passing by them unnoticed. Joe asks what that thing was, and Lin wants to know why she even came there. She explains that 2 people are needed to operate the power room, and since Lin's body is in a weakened state, he might pass out there. The monster then suddenly charges toward the wall where they are hiding. The young man wonders what kind of monster that is, as it is different from the other white armored creatures, and he is too weak to fight it now. He could end up dead. According to the doctor, the white armored creatures don't eat people. They only drain and store their blood. But he wonders where all that blood is going. Maggie looks out the window and asks Joe what is happening, shocking the old man with the terrifying sight. Since the white armored creatures are spreading across the building, and a female is lying on the ground with an immense belly. Corbin comments that she looks lifeless, and Dorothy says she won't attack them anymore. However, a light appears from the building, and a man is identified as Morse code. Dorothy asks about Morse, and Corbin explains that it is a signal language, allowing communication through different letters of the alphabet and numbers depending on the pattern used. Joe from the window signals with the light, saying that they should understand and not go there. Corbin is surprised by the code, and Dorothy questions what they are trying to say. The young man understands little but tells the woman that they are asking them to go there. Both move toward the building, while Dorothy appears hesitant, and Corbin says that her daughter should be there, but Joe does not want the 2 of them to take that path. Still in the nest, Lin thinks they need to follow that route, but a white armored creature is blocking the entrance. He has no choice but to fight the monster. Cracking sounds come from the ceiling, drawing the creature's attention. Lin and Ju take the opportunity to move forward, thinking that this was a perfect distraction. The doctor comments that the veins on the floor seem connected to those who lost their lives. Lin agrees and says it's bizarre to use humans as part of a nest when suddenly something emerges behind him. It is a white armored creature with a skeletal structure. It takes on a humanoid form, resembling a lich. The creature shoves its hand into its own belly, pulling out intestines and using them to forge a sword, then swings the weapon downward. Lin senses something strange and curses the monster. He pushes Lin aside while accelerating his step. The creature charges to strike both of them, while the young man tries to reach Joe, getting slashed on his back to shield his friend from the attack. He steps back, holding onto the woman, saying that the monster is much faster than he is, because that white armored creature is far stronger than the others. Lin places his hand on his own shoulder, thinking about how powerful that white armored creature is. The monster suddenly makes a sound, its vision entirely focused on Ju. Lin Mo wonders why its target is the doctor and not him, but the creature lunges forward with its sword. The young man manages to push Joe aside, but gets slashed by the swords. That monster is too fast, making it difficult for Lin to hold out, because if the creature keeps attacking like this, both he and the doctor might lose their lives here. He wonders if he is about to die again. The parasite appears, talking about running away, asking if that isn't what people of his kind do in situations like this, because as he knows, in this frozen world, there is no mercy. It is a world where everyone is equal. So if he abandons the doctor, he might still survive. Lin says that he won't run away, because if he does that now, there would be no difference between him and Lu Dalon, saying that he does not need to abandon his humanity to survive, surprising the parasite with his response. Lin explains that if she is part of him, she should understand. When innocent people lose their lives, his chest aches, and he feels suffocated. That pain is his humanity suffering, just like the fossils of his ancestors, which bear fractures proving that they did not abandon their companions. Therefore, Lin can only think of one thing now. Since he has this power, he will make sure to use it to his advantage, forming veins across his body and horns. The symbol on his necklace begins to be consumed by the veins. As the white armored creature charges toward Ju with its sword, the doctor is frightened and starts sweating, but the creature's attack is blocked. A bluish white armored creature stands before her, and Ju asks what it is. Lin is that monster and declares that with this power, he will protect people. He notices that he looks similar to that white armored creature, but he clenches his fist as he does not feel the same as it. The young man releases energy into his hand, and his monstrous body takes on a blue glow. The parasite comments that this is interesting because it seems she made the right choice in selecting him, and the young man will now feel the essence of power. Lin then charges to punch the creature, landing a blow that the monster defends against. He advances again, attempting a horizontal kick, but the monster dodges. Lin has become faster, but it is still not enough as the monster continues to evade. Joe questions what is happening because he has created a new layer on his skin, as if he is absorbing energy from the air and converting it into power. But given the place they are in, she wonders if this is an unlimited energy source and what the essence of this power is. Lin thinks that for now he will put aside his resemblance to the white armored creatures.